Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Free Motion Quilting Project. Today we are getting back on the foundation piece, Locks of Hair, and we're going to take these pieces that we've worked on for the past several weeks and turn the edges under to turn them into appliques. And here's what these pieces look like right now. You can see all these different beautiful colors we've been working with. We work with every color of the rainbow, and then I did a second red because we've got 7 locks of hair. And so each piece is pretty rough. You can see in this one there's a lot of ragged edges, and if I flip it over you can maybe see this line is the foundation, and so we need to trim and turn this edge so at least one side of it is turned under so we can connect all these pieces together and have them look really beautiful all in the background of this quilt. So the steps to making the hair, the steps to turning these edges is fairly complicated. The reason it's complicated is these are very big, very thick pieces, and I want to take my time and make sure that I form first a template that will allow me to turn those edges under and really get a nice crisp edge, a very exact shape. I really want to make sure that while I might have been working rather inconsistently with these, I kind of said anything goes. From here on, I really want to be very exact and know that I'm going to take something that's a little ragged and make sure that I get exactly what I'm looking for at the end. I really want the turned under edges to be nice and smooth. I want this whole thing to connect together really beautifully. So the inspiration for how I turn, the technique behind it, really came from another quilter. I learned from Sharon Chamber via her videos on YouTube, and then she has the Sharon Chamber Network and also DVDs. They're excellent videos on a technique that she calls Applique, or Applique, I think. And so the base of this, how I turn, I start with basically the same set of steps. We're going to create a freezer paper template, 2 layers of freezer paper, mark our design on it, cut it out, and then turn these pieces using that template. So let's get started. The very first step will be to take freezer paper, and you want to measure and make sure that you're rolling out as a big a piece as the width of the pattern, and we're working on the pattern just over the hair section, just over the section where there is hair. I'm not going to make a template the whole size of the pattern itself. And now I'm going to press this down to my ironing board, and I have a super firm ironing board. I made it, it's homemade, and I need to press this freezer paper down to take any shrink in it out. And I also like to press it simply because it seems like once pressed, these pieces go together a lot better. So what you're going to do is take 4 pieces of freezer paper like this and basically do exactly this. You're going to take the freezer paper, stretch it out over your pressing board, give it a nice press, make sure it's completely flattened out onto the board, and this is sticky side down, so this is actually sticking to my pressing board, and that's fine. It's just a very light wax on the freezer paper, and that allows it to bond to whatever we're sticking it to. So I'm basically just pressing this through, and that looks good. So take this step and repeat this 4 times. This is taking the shrink out of the freezer paper. It's also flattening it out. I can lift it up, and it's a lot flatter, and I'll connect this to other pieces simply by layering 2 on top of one another, and then the other 2 on top of one another, interlock them together until you have a nice big. And just in case it's not clear which section we're working in, I'm going to work from the edge I extended and create a piece that's big enough to cover to her face. Just simply so I want to make sure that I have all of the locks of hair, and then this is going to be something that I turn into an applique as well. I'm going to piece some fabric together and then turn it, but that's going to be later. Really we want to focus on mostly just this big hair section. And here's the piece that I put together. And it's gotten a little wrinkly because it's been on my tables for a few days. And so basically I took my piece of freezer paper, laid it out, layered another piece to make sure I had enough length for this entire space, pressed it on top, then added a third piece on this side and a fourth piece on this side. So then I've got areas that are a lot thicker. I've got areas that are 3 pieces thick, and that's perfectly fine. That's no big deal. But this is going to be my template, and you might notice this is a mirror image. So in order to mark this, here's what you do. All you do is you take your master pattern and flip it over. You put your freezer paper on top with the paper side up, and you mark your freezer paper. It's very simple. Pattern down, freezer paper up, and you mark everything out. So now I'm going to move my pattern away, and then we're just going to work with the freezer paper template. Okay, at this point it's really important to decide where you want to turn the edges. And looking at this, you know, I've got this piece right here that's red, and it comes to a very sharp point. And I know with the thickness of these foundation pieces, that would be a really, really hard thing to create, just turning the edges under. If I had both edges coming to a point right there. So I wouldn't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is grab a pen, and this is just a green pigment pen, and I like the different color because it kind of keeps things clear. And I don't want to have to turn this edge, and I don't have to, because I can always turn the edge of the orange and overlap the raw edges of the red. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark a dashed line on the edge of the orange, and that's going to indicate to me that that edge is what's going to be turned, and that's going to overlap that red section. On the red section, I'm going to mark the line here, the line closest to her face. I'll turn that line. And then I'll keep going up, and I'll always be marking the line for each particular piece, the line closest to the piece before it. I'm not going to mark this line because I'd have to create that point, and that would be very tricky. You know, sometimes I see things and, you know, we can bite off more than we can chew, and I know that the limitation with this is the fact that we have some very, very thick pieces of fabric here. Okay, we've got one more, our green piece. As long as you have a good visual of which edge you're turning, because once we get all this cut apart, it can be a little confusing. Okay. And now we're getting into the blue, and you can see the blue section almost, you know, it does come to a point, but when we get to the purple section, we're going to have these 2 points right here. And that might actually be a little bit easier to turn. But the one thing is, this whole piece right here was not turned. So this is a little situation where planning, you might have to stop and kind of think about this. I still haven't quite figured out how I want to work this. I could take these pieces and turn each edge under all the way through here and match that up. That could work fine. I could turn just a section of this green piece and maybe stop here and then have it overlap, maybe stop it right here and have the blue piece be the one that has the single point where everything's coming together. It's really entirely up to you how you do this. I haven't honestly quite figured out how I'm going to handle that, but these 4 pieces are definitely ready to go. So I'm going to take a pair of scissors and cut these apart. And I'm going to actually start with this red section, and I'm just taking a pair of sharp scissors, and you want to make sure that you cut very smooth and evenly. You want to make sure that you stay on your line, because this is what you're turning against. If this is the line that you're turning, and this one is, and so this is your guideline, and whatever you turn, if you have a big gouge in this piece of freezer paper, this is our template, if you have a big gouge in it, that might show up in your finished applique. And another thing I just thought about that I might want to do is I might want to mark, before I get this completely cut apart, I might want to mark just some lines to help me line this up later, because these pieces are going to need to come together in this arrangement, and it could be really easy to get them off. And I'm also going to be lining her head up, her face up, with the same arrangement. So I think that should do it. You don't need to go overboard with it. Just to have some marks where you know, okay, whenever I put these pieces together, that mark needs to be lined up. Okay, at this point, I turn the whole thing over so I can work from this angle. You always want to turn your work so that way you can get the best angle. And not make any mistakes in the pattern. So here's my lock of hair, and this is the first red section. And I'm just going to take my piece and lay it out. And this was actually the piece that I forgot to mark my lines on the back of the foundation. I think that that definitely is a step that would have made my life a little easier, but I can faintly see the tip and I can faintly see this line. So that's what I'm using as my guideline here. And notice that I actually left on this little bit extra over here of the template. I'm not turning the edges of the quilt, the edges of the hair, so I'm going to leave that in alone. I'm just leaving it long. Because whenever we put this on the quilt, I might find that as it shifts, as it moves, as I quilt it, I might need some extra. So I'm leaving it a little long on the edges. Okay. And I'm just basically laid my freezer paper template. Remember, it was the reverse. So it's basically wax side down on the French fuse. And you're not going to melt the French fuse. It can take the heat. And I am just pressing this with a hot, dry iron and making sure that that freezer paper is completely bonded and nicely stuck to this piece. Okay, so I flipped it over because I've got this edge to turn, and I'm going to come in here with my scissors and just generally cut this down to about an inch wide. I don't want to go any narrower. I don't want to get in here and start whacking this down to 1/4 of an inch. We're not turning something small here. This is very thick. This is a lot of layers. So the wider the fabric you have on the outside edge, the better, the more that you'll have to work with, and the easier that this will feel. Okay. So I like to get started kind of in the middle of a hump like this. This kind of curve is easier to turn. You don't have to clip it. This down here, we're going to have to do some clipping in order to get that fabric to turn over. So let's get started right here. And here's what I've done. I have a little cup and I've got some starch. This is spray starch, and I really like the Niagara brand spray starch in a spray bottle. I don't like aerosols because I can't tell how much starch I have left. And I also don't like them because they're bad for the environment, but I don't like them because I can't tell how much is in the bottle, and so I never have enough starch. I always seem to be running out with the aerosols. So if you can find it, I really like that. And I do want to say this is definitely going to be something you need to use starch, not sizing or some other alternative, starch alternative. Okay, so I basically took my paintbrush. I'm talking too much here. I took my paintbrush and I got some starch on it, and I brushed it over about a 4 to 5 inch section right on this edge. And now I'm going to take it and use my thumbs to just pull it over and then press my iron right there on that edge. And I'm just going to hold it here. I've got my iron over that whole section that I got wet, and I'm just going to hold it here for a few seconds. And what this is doing, that starch is going to make the fabric have a new memory. It's going to give it a brain transplant. And so now it's going to think, oh, okay, I want to bend and fold over like that. And that's exactly what we want it to do. And if you're finding that the piece that you're turning is really, really thick, once you get it turned, you can take your actual starch bottle and just do a little light squirt right there on the edge and hit it with your iron again. Because we've got so many layers. We've got the foundation, we've got the French fuse, we've got the fabric on the opposite side. You know, you might be turning the French fuse and getting it to turn, and you might be getting the foundation to turn when you put the starch on this side. But the fabric is what ultimately needs to turn too, and so that's why you might want to put starch on both sides of this edge. So now I'm going to start down here, and I start kind of narrow. I start with like a 3 or 4 inch area covered in starch, And then I start widening it as I feel more comfortable turning that edge. You know, it's turning with confidence more than anything else. And then I'm gently pulling the fabric forward with my thumb. Oh, actually, it would be, the direction is away from my body with my thumb. And then as I'm pulling it, I'm hitting it with the iron and letting it press in place. And there's definitely a very big difference between the areas, like right here I've got several pieces with seam allowance all in there. Over here I've only got one piece of fabric. It's got a very different feel depending on how thick the foundation is at any particular place. And I should say, I'm using this method, this freezer paper doubled and turning the edges with starch. This whole 9 yards came from Sharon Chamber with her technique Piece Leak, but we're not going to piece with this. We're turning this into an applique. We're not going to try and piece these pieces together. There is a really, really, really cool technique that Sharon does. She would take these pieces and actually stick them through the sewing machine and sew them together so we wouldn't have this big turned edge. But that is not something I want to do with this. Okay, so at this point you can see I've started to turn this edge by clipping, and I'm clipping not all the way to the freezer paper. I'm stopping about 1/8 of an inch before the freezer paper, and let me zoom in so you can see it more clearly. Right there. So you can see I'm about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the freezer paper, and these clips are about 1 inch apart. So now I'm going to zoom back out again. And add my starch. And then just use your thumbs again. Pull the fabric away from you. Hold it in place. And I'm literally I'm giving it a little tug. It can take it. It's quite thick, so I think it can take a little bit of pulling and tugging into place. I'm not worried about distorting this. I don't think that little one got any starch. And I've used this technique a lot. Once I learned Piece Leak from Sharon Chamber, I really love that technique, but I didn't necessarily like it for piecing. I didn't want to take the time to, I just couldn't seem to find the accuracy with that. So I just took it, the same template idea, and turned it into an applique, a way to turn my appliques, and I really love it for that. And that's the really neat thing, is any technique, you kind of have to run through the steps a couple times and learn it the way it's being taught, and then you have to take it and decide, okay, well, what do I want to do with it? How does this apply to my quilting? And how do I take it and make the quilts that I'm wanting to make? How will it help me get where I want to go? And that's how I started turning appliques with it. I really, really like having, especially a wide seam allowance. Even if this was just a plain piece of fabric, I would still be working with this nice wide seam allowance, because it allows you so much more control. When you're turning those tiny little edges, that's how I learned how to applique. I was turning these little 1/4 inch edges. They're so tiny, and it was so impossible to get that accurate, especially at points. It was so impossible to turn that and get a decent looking edge, and I was just struggling with it so much that it was such a relief to find, oh, okay, I can just add some seam allowance, leave some seam allowance in there. I don't trim it down so much, and I have a much easier time of it. So I'm going to go through this entire edge and add more starch on the outside on this red fabric. The one thing that you don't want to do, you don't want to put starch on fabric and then walk away from it and let it dry. You always want to press it out. I've walked away from it like this, and it just kind of went goopy, and especially because this is paper. The freezer paper is paper, and if it gets too wet, it will start to get wiggly and wobbly, and then it won't be a nice firm template. You can see that piece. Where does it want to go? Yep, that freezer paper has just gotten a little wet right here. And so I just need to be very careful and maybe sit here with my iron on it for a little while and let it dry out. But I need to be gentle with that one edge because it's clearly wanting to flex on me. Okay, well that is looking pretty good. Now I can flip it over. And you can see the entire piece nicely turned. We have this beautiful turned edge now. It's just beautiful, and it looks so much better having this turned edge and seeing, okay, this, what these pieces are going to look like now in the finished quilt. And let's see really quickly how I turn the orange piece, just for review. This is going to be a super fast video. I'm speeding this up as fast as it can go, so it only takes up a couple, maybe 1 minute of video footage. It does take, a little bit of time to turn this, and so you just need to be mindful of, sit down, take an afternoon, turn all your pieces. Don't get in a rush with it. Don't have a lot of distractions, so you have to walk away a lot. Just sit down and take one piece at a time if you have to, one piece a day. You turn them each and give them enough here's time. What it looks like whenever you finish your orange piece. And I'm just going to kind of generally lay this on top. We're going to learn how to connect all these pieces together in a future video. But right now you know how to turn one edge, and they're all going to come together and look beautiful on your quilt. Okay, so once you get all of your pieces turned on one edge, and this whole edge thing might be just a little confusing, so let me show you a diagram of Express Your Love and which edges specifically that I turned. So here's the pattern, and this is just a miniature size version of it, but basically this is the edges that I turned. I turned the red edge closest to her body, then the orange edge closest to her body, then the yellow, then the green, then the blue, and then this purple is right here. It's the second to the end, second to the top. That one I turned on both sides, and then that left the red one here. I only had to turn it on this outside edge. So the purple section, you can see here, I've turned up both edges, and so now I've got this space right here to turn. And let me zoom in so that way you can see this more clearly. Okay, and here's something that you're going to have to do for almost every single piece. We've got the foundation here, and we've got our fabric underneath it. And if you can, it depends on your piecing, but if you can, slightly pull up your freezer paper template and hold it back and grab some scissors and just trim out the foundation. This is grading. We're taking out one layer in this area. It's just going to make this area easier to turn. You just don't want to clip the purple fabric, and you don't want to clip the foundation, so be really careful as you do that. Okay, and then I'm going to give it another press. You want to make sure that you have nice crease lines on either side of this end. And the reason that I chose the purple, there were two reasons. Number one, it has a fairly wide end. We've got a sharp point here, but this is not that sharp of a point right here, so these 2 points should be fairly easy to turn. The second reason is for this particular form of foundation piecing, it was the easiest of all of them. And so, well, the least bulk, the least amount of fabric building up on these edges. Now I'm pressing the freezer paper down because I want that to be really, really firmly in place right there. And it might be losing its sticky a little bit, so just be careful, be gentle. Okay, so we know that that goes like that and that goes like that. What we need to do is start getting this edge to turn forward. And we want to be really careful about applying too much starch here because you can start getting really wiggly wobbly with your freezer paper. So I'm going to first crease it by folding it up. It's also getting really hot, so I'm going to be careful how I touch it because everything's really hot now from my iron. Okay, I applied my starch, just painted some starch on right on the edge, and then I'm just going to use my thumb to pull it back and then basically just set my iron down on it and hold it for 5 seconds until that starch dries. Okay, so that lifted that up. That's looking pretty good. Now this corner, I'm going to lift this straight forward. It's basically, here's the point right here, and I want to go just a direct fold like that. And again, I'm going to paint it on the outside edge because I don't want to get that freezer paper too wet. Press my iron down again. And you just need to be patient with this. It takes some time. And so long as you're patient and you leave your seam allowances alone for a while, you're going to have more than enough space to turn everything. If you start cutting things, then you could really get into a risky situation. Okay, so here's my first corner right here, and that's looking actually pretty good. So I'll hit that, just like that. And more pressing is always better than less pressing. So don't be worried too much about, you know, sitting there and holding the iron on it. It's fine. Okay, so now we're going to aim to try and get that over and get that nice point. I'm not going to be able to get, you know, something super sharp right here. There's just too many layers. There's just too much fabric, but I can get it as close as I can. And so the first step will be, we've got all these fold lines in, so I know that it can turn. So now I'm going to trim this back. Okay, so I've trimmed that up and it's still nicely creased forward. And at this point you have to kind of make up your mind. Do you want to have this edge going over and that edge on top, or that edge coming over and this edge on top? It's really, it could go either way completely. And so this side seems to be a lot thinner and lighter weight. The fabric, I was able to trim out all that foundation underneath it. So I'm going to actually push it forward. It's going to be underneath. And now I'm going to come in and clip. And remember that you can always clip more later, but if you clip too close, that's it. You can't put it back. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I might trim that down some more, but right now I'm pretty happy with it. And now I'm just going to put my finger here real firmly and fold over. And that's how I'm going to get my point. Now, to hold it all in place, I'm going to grab some Elmer's glue. Now, Roxanne's Glue Based It, Liquid Stitch, or Elmer's glue. I use all three pretty much interchangeably. I got the tip from Sharon Chamber. It makes a really fine point tip, so that way I can control how much glue I'm putting on this thing. The one downside is the tip can get clogged, so keep a little needle next to your ironing board, so that way you can work it through, and then should be able to just get a little dot of glue. And so I'm going to start by putting a little dot of glue below, and actually I think I can clip this a little closer and not lose any control. Just like that. That looks better to me. And this, turning corners, turning points like this, it's practice more than anything else. It is the number of times that you do it. So you see that little tiny dot of glue? I'm going to fold over and give it a press. And Elmer's glue cannot hurt your fabric. It cannot hurt your quilt. It is starch, basically a concentrated form of the same starch that we're using to starch our fabric. So it's perfectly fine. I have never seen any issue happen from using Elmer's glue on a quilt. And I figure if Sharon Chamber uses it, it's good enough for me. So that's where I kind of learned that from. I learned that tip from, and I have always used it. I really, really like it. It's always worked well for me. Okay, so this is nicely secured. I need another dot of glue on top. And then I'm going to grab that needle and I'm going to use it to secure this in place. I'm just pressing down with the needle, and then I'll fold over, just holding everything really tightly, and then I'll hit it with my iron again. The first time you do it, the first time I did it at least, it was terrible. It was awful looking. Second, third, fourth time, still probably pretty bad, but the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And at this point, I'm still going to leave a little bit probably more than I need, but I'm being careful not to clip underneath. I'm just going to trim that up a bit. Like I said, you can always cut more later. You cannot put it back once you clip too close. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And so now I flip it over, and you can see how this is going to look. Kind of, I'll clip those seams down just a bit, but really that is, for all these layers, for all this fabric, and the foundation piecing, that is as good as it gets. So I am very happy with that. So turn that purple section, or if you don't do purple fabric with that one, it's the second from the top. And I'm going to put a little bit more glue in here to glue these seam allowances together as I talk. So that's what I'm doing. But basically just turn these two edges, and I think this is going to be the easiest one of all of these to turn because we didn't have one single sharp point. I think that this one was the easiest one to turn. Okay, so that is firmly pressed in place, and now I'll flip it over so you can see it. And that looks pretty good. So I am very pleased with that. So your purple section, of course, turn both edges. Now let's talk about the ones that have a single edge. We turned all these edges and it worked out really well, but what about the tip for these? And basically you want to kind of do the same thing. You want to clip out the foundation and trim that down. And you can see here I was able to trim it down through this whole section. And then you're going to, you still have that part folded, but grab the end of your fabric, the end, anything that you have towards the top, and fold it forward. And you might want to give just a little bit of an angle to this because it depends on how the pieces really match up and lay together. But you might want to actually angle it something like that, simply because whenever you stack this another piece on top, you might have fabric jutting out the wrong way and have to clip that back. And so then you might have this angle like this, and that's not going to work. So let me show you how I'm going to turn this corner. Okay, so I'm going to fold this up and paint my starch, and I'm giving this the nice little angle here. And you could even make this more like that, and that would be probably even better. You want a little bit of an angle because when these pieces go together, we're going to have several points all coming together at the same place, and they're going to overlap one another, but this edge, this seam allowance edge, could jut out and be noticeable. So, and we'll have to futz with it then, so we don't have to do that. So, okay, so that edge is folded up. This edge is nicely creased this way. And so that means we've got this little flap. So if I folded that way, I would have this, and I don't want that. That would be very noticeable. Okay, so how we deal with that? Take this little excess, flip it up, paint some starch on it, give it a nice press. If you ever feel like everything's just gotten really soggy, if you ever feel like all your pieces are just kind of slightly damp, that means that you've used too much starch and you're not pressing enough. You're not pressing long enough. So just pretty much just hold your iron down on it until it's totally dry. You don't want a lot of moist fabric because moist fabric bends and shifts and starts to twist. Okay, so this is folded up nicely. I'm going to grab my scissors and clip it down. Again, being careful not to clip too much. I'm going to flip my folded edge up. Actually, I want to do this edge first. I'm going to do that edge first because that edge is mostly going to get covered by another piece. This edge is going to be the one that's noticeable, that's covering another piece itself, so I want to make sure it is as big as it needs to be. The least trimmed down, I guess you could say. Okay, trimming this part down. And because these seam allowances are so big, this is a whole continual process of trimming down. I'm trimming down now and getting things under control. I'll be trimming again as I sew these pieces together, as I zigzag them together. So understand that this might seem really bulky and a lot of excess fabric and a lot of waste here, but it's allowing us to make these turns and these angles, and that's exactly what we need. Okay, so right here at this point, I need to clip that down and kind of make a little angle with it. I already glued it, but I need to make a little angle with it so that way I can do my second turn. Okay, and now I flip this side up, and really this is going to be entirely held together with Elmer's glue, but that's okay. Flip that up, grab my needle, my little pen, and I'll hold that and just set and mush that forward. And give it a press. Now, was that perfect? Absolutely not. I probably could have done better, but the requirements of filming this is further away from me than I usually have it, but I'm pretty happy with that. That one is not as perfect as the first, but this is going to largely be covered up with the yellow piece. So I'm not too worried about it, and it feels a lot less bulky than what it was. And I know with this angle now, the way it is, I know that yellow piece is going to cover it just perfectly, and it's not going to pose a problem. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed learning how to turn these edges under. It's one of those things that I learned. I learned a piece of another technique, and I really loved it, but I didn't like the whole technique. I took it, used what I liked, and turned it into something new. And that's what quilters have been doing for generations. So I hope that you'll take this, give it a try the way I've outlined here, and then start playing with it. You might feel like, well, you don't need to double the freezer paper template. Fine, go and try it and see what happens. I tried that, and personally I found that it wasn't a stable enough base to turn that edge. I wasn't able to feel the edge of the template, so I wasn't able to get a really nice accurate turn for my applique. But you might have a different experience, and I really hope that you'll share that experience on the Free Motion Quilting Project. My name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for that project. Find hundreds of videos on free motion quilting designs, piecing, and now applique at freemotionproject.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.